Got a tooth pulled last week. Doesn't affect my speech now. I still sound like I should be fucking horses, according to the internet. I've been getting a lot of coronet films lately. Coincidence? We will tell you how to eat, then how to think, then how to breathe!
I did this film because I got sick too easily, okay?
Just before lunch one day, a puppet show was put on at school.
Ugh,
It was
0 out of
called
10.
Mr.
Lacks
Bungle
character
Goes to
development.
Lunch. It was fun to watch.
Anything but reading can be fun.
In the puppet show, Mr. Bungle came to the boys' room on his way to lunch.
He was thinking about
He
taking
looked
it
at
up.
His hands. His hands were dirty, and his hair was messy.
His name was Dylan
But
Klebold.
Mr. Bungle didn't stop to wash his hands or comb his hair. He went right to lunch.
Wait a tick, you can bring combs to school?
Then, instead of getting into line at the lunchroom, Mr. Bungle pushed everyone aside and went right to the front.
Well, he did have VIP clearance at this
Even though
club.
this made the children laugh, no one thought that was a fair thing to do. Then, in the lunchroom, Mr. Bungle
My uncle
was
works
so
at Nintendo,
clumsy
piss
and
ants.
impolite that he knocked over everything, and no one wanted to sit next to him. And when he
This bitch is
finally
empty.
knocked his own tray
Yeet.
off the table, that was the end of the puppet show.
The teacher is now loaded enough to carry
The children
on
knew
for the rest of the
that
day.
Even though Mr. Bungle was funny to watch, he wouldn't be much fun to eat with. Phil knew that a Mr. Bungle wouldn't have many friends. He wouldn't want to be like Mr. Bungle.
Oh, seeding that social paranoia
Later,
now,
Miss
are
Brown
we?
said it was time for the children who ate in the cafeteria to go to lunch. She hoped there weren't any Mr. Bungles in this room.
But she would love to see Mr. Jack Daniels in his shiny alcoholic splendor.
Phil stopped to return a book to Miss Brown while his friends went on to the lunchroom.
So what do you think I'll catch
would
her
have
on the
to catch
ride?
up with them
Now, I
later.
know pictures of boobs.
On his way to catch up with his friends, Phil almost walked past the boys' room. But
Time
he
to
stopped
smoke it up
and
with
thought,
Nikki Sixx.
Were his hands clean? No, they were a little dirty.
Still got
Phil
blood from
remembered
punching a
that
nerd
Mr.
at
Bungle
recess.
Didn't wash his hands. Mr. Bungle's hair was messy too.
How could it be
Phil didn't want
messy?
to be
It's
like Mr.
short.
Bungle. Inside the boys' room, Phil was surprised to see some of his friends washing their hands too.
They just got done jerking
Phil
off to
washed
each
his
other.
hands
No thanks
well,
to Cindy
with
not
lots
putting
of
out
soap.
anymore. All the soap in the world can't wash off your
Then he rinsed the
sins.
soap off. Phil dried his hands well too. When he was finished, he threw the paper towel in the basket where it belonged.
Next to the Sword Art
Then he
Online
made sure that his
DVDs.
hair looked neat.
They can bring combs to school, but not cell
Now,
phones for
Phil
when a
and his
shooting
friends were ready
happens.
for lunch.
I don't recall a Sandy Hook shooter sparing someone because they gave him a fucking comb.
There was a line of children waiting to get into the lunchroom when Phil got there. He saw some boys he knew at the front of the line.
They're serving sugar
They
cookies
waved for
with
him and brought
crack.
to the front with them. But Phil didn't want to break into line as Mr. Bungle did.
He's not VIP enough.
So Phil went to the end. That was the fair thing to do.
You miserable little
He would see
shit.
his other friends inside the lunchroom. The line moved very fast. And
Because the
soon Phil
cafeteria
was
ladies
inside.
had a sample at the crack supply.
First he picked up his tray. Then he got his silverware.
Due to the suicide in grade 4, it's plastic
He
sporks.
put his knife, fork, and spoon neatly on the tray. And then he slid his tray along.
Move it, cunt!
He always enjoyed looking at the good food in the cafeteria.
But because
It
of his
tasted
parents'
good,
negligence,
and
they
was
gave him
good
peanut
for
butter
him, too.
sandwiches.
Instead of having a sandwich today, Phil decided to take the hot lunch.
Asbestos and drywall.
Phil took some bread and butter, too. And he knew what else he wanted. Milk.
Back in my day,
But
they were in
Alice took
bags.
the last carton on the tray. Maybe there was more milk. So he said, "May I please have some milk?"
Damn it, more work I
Phil
gotta do for
remembered
these
to say,
shits.
"May I?" and "please." That was very polite. Yes, there was more milk.
These had PCP injected in them, despite the alcoholic teacher.
Phil remembered to say thank you when he took the carton of milk.
Thanks, sugar tits.
Phil had good manners. He didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle in the lunchroom. Phil didn't want to forget his dessert. The cake looked delicious.
Wish I had cake that large in my childhood. I'm sorry, I recorded this before I ate anything.
The lunchroom supervisor said she had noticed how polite Phil was, and she smiled at him.
She too was
She
loaded.
wouldn't smile at a Mr. Bungle. Phil went to the table where his friends were.
Wish the cafeterias I was in had moving chairs. All of them were bolted to the
Pulled out
table.
his chair quietly and sat down. He knew his friends wouldn't like a noisy Mr. Bungle at their table.
The social paranoia
There was
now
someone
on full
Phil
blast. Just wait until he gets on Tumblr. He'll be
He
even
always
afraid to
brought
go
his lunch from
outside.
home. It looked good. Freddie had a sandwich, an apple, a cookie, and milk.
Thanks, Obama.
Before Phil began to eat, he always put a napkin on his lap.
Tough call.
So did
Want
Freddie.
food stains on your lap or your shirt?
Everyone liked Freddie. He was very polite. For example, if he had food in his mouth when someone talked to him, he always took time to chew the food with his mouth closed and swallow before he answered.
Still couldn't get a word in anyway because Stacy
Phil
won't
noticed
shut the
how
hell
straight
up.
and tall Freddie usually sat. Freddie kept his feet on the floor, too.
What if they're dwarfs, Mr. Narrator?
Phil would rather be like Freddie than like Mr. Bungle.
He's gonna grow up solving
Another
mysteries with
polite
a
person
nerd, a
everyone
valley
liked
girl,
was
and a
Alice.
stoner with a talking dog. Well, wait,
For
he said
example,
Freddie.
when
Sorry,
Alice
he's gonna grow up to be a
sneezed, she
dream-haunting
covered her
killer
mouth and nose.
pedophile.
This protected her friends at the table from any germs. While Phil and his friends ate, a boy ran past their table.
Miss Finster,
You
Spinelli's
shouldn't
first
run
name
in
is
the lunchroom.
Ashley.
Only Mr. Bungle would do that. Phil and his friends wouldn't like to have a Mr. Bungle at their table. Then lunchtime wouldn't be as much fun as it is.
Shun the bungle!
Phil ate
Shun!
and enjoyed his lunch. Finally, he had eaten everything except his dessert. He saved his cake for last.
Marie Antoinette up
Only
in
a
this
Mr. Bungle
bitch!
would eat his dessert before he had finished the rest of his lunch. And Phil wasn't a Mr. Bungle. The cake was good.
But the cake is still a lie.
Phil drank his milk carefully. Some children are messy when they drink milk, but not Phil.
I don't want to be a Mr. Bungle. Please don't turn
As
me into
each of
Mr.
Phil's
Bungle.
friends finished, they didn't leave the table, but waited for all the others to finish eating too.
Suckers.
Phil was the last one done. He wiped his mouth and hands carefully with his napkin.
Then left the table messy
Then
for
he
an
cleaned the
underpaid
table where
McDonald's
he
worker
sat.
to clean.
He didn't want to leave his place at the table dirty. Everyone at the table cleaned his own place well.
They too
Look
are
at that
socially
table.
paranoid out the
It
ass.
was left very messy. Phil thought a Mr. Bungle must have sat there. But Phil didn't want to be like Mr. Bungle.
The voices in
So
his
he
head
put his
forbids
chair
it.
neatly into place. And his table looked fine. Not a piece of paper or scrap of food was left on it.
Clean enough to have sex on.
No Mr. Bungle sat here. Phil's friends were careful to put their waste papers and empty milk cartons where they belonged.
Right on top of all the
In this
Music
way,
Idol
they helped
animes.
keep the lunchroom clean. Phil was certain that Mr. Bungle wouldn't put his paper in the waste basket and his empty carton on the milk
Who keeps
tray.
used milk cartons?
Mr.
And if it's for
Bungle probably
recycling,
wouldn't
why isn't
bother
there
to
a
put his
separate
lunch
can for
tray in
those?
the right place either, but Phil and his friends did. Lunch was good today. And then Miss Brown told Phil and his friends how proud she was of them.
You're
They had
still
left their
miserable
tables
little
and needed in the
shits.
lunchroom. No one here was a Mr. Bungle, and no one wanted to be.
Now the Tumblr will they'll pick up that even
you
saying
like
hello
Mr.
is
Bungle?
rape in some weird way.
Mr. Bungle is a shame because he spoils lunchtime.
But he's a puppet.
Don't be like Mr. Bungle. Have good lunchtime manners, and lunch will be more fun for everyone.
Up until you graduate, where all those manners will be pointless as you sit in an empty dorm cooking ramen for the 4th week in a row, if not in a homeless shelter. Also be afraid to do anything as it'll label you a Mr. Bungle or a rapist.